on today's Story Beat.
I think people should pay attention to the relationships in this business. I think that if you ask me what my favorite thing is about what I do, I would say first the people. I get to exist and collaborate and create art with people who are not only enormously talented, but people who I love like sisters and brothers and aunts and uncles.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Deborah Grace Winer, is a theatrical writer, creator of theatrical revues and concerts, and she's a leading expert on the American Songbook. Her new collaboration with Jazz at Lincoln Center, the Songbook Sundays series at Dizzy's Club, has been an instant sold-out music destination. Deborah's previous collaborations include Feinstein's 54 Below, Birdland, and a decade as artistic director of the 92 Wise Lyrics and Lyricists concert series, steering the Venerable series back to audience and critical acclaim. She collaborates with top-tier artists from Broadway and the music world and works with leading institutions. Among Deborah's various books, On the Sunny Side of the Street, The Life and Lyrics of Dorothy Fields was named by the Wall Street Journal one of the 5 best books on American songwriters. Her articles have appeared in the New York Times and numerous other publications, and her plays have been produced off-Broadway and regionally. Deborah's been featured on PBS American Masters as well as NPR's Fresh Air and Morning Edition. Look for Deborah's newest project, the audio adventure podcast series, Flash Force, Middle-Aged Women Superheroes Save Democracy, with an all-star Broadway cast, which is being launched in 2023. So for all those reasons and many more, it's a true privilege for me to chat today with the multi-talented Deborah Grace Winer. Deborah, welcome to StoryBeat.
Hi, Steve, and please call me Deb. Only Deborah. If I've done something terribly wrong, you can revert to Deborah, but otherwise.
Let's go back to your earliest roots. Where was it in your life? At what age were you? And what were you doing when you first took interest in the theater and musical theater and the American Songbook? When did that start for you?
I think it's hard to remember because it was kind of an always thing. I'm from Manhattan. And so I grew up in the middle of, this kind of stuff. My parents were, my mom, who unfortunately just passed away right before the pandemic, was a former concert pianist. And my dad was a physician, and both of them were very much in the kind of New York kind of cultural thing. They had a lot of interesting friends. And so I was kind of brought up in the middle of that. I also went to school with the kids of artists and performers of our parents' generation. And so it was pretty much, I was kind of pretty much in the swirl of it. And I kind of always just knew that was the world I wanted to be in.
Even as a little girl, you were into it.
Yeah, I was. I mean, I think I was. And I was always, my mom and dad both loved old movies. So I was like a lot of our colleagues, was kind of introduced to a lot of stuff that way through old movies on TV at that time. And then when I was a little bit older, I was a theater apprentice. My folks had a kind of a little summer and weekend plays in Westport, Connecticut, which is right outside, about an hour away from New York. And that Westport, as that part of Connecticut, especially in those days, was home to a lot of theatrical and artistic people.
Sure.
And there was this very terrific theater personality, doyen named Lucille Ortel. And the Lucille Ortel Theater down in the Village is named after her because that was her theater.
Right.
And she also had a place in Westport, which was a summer theater called the White Barn Theater. And
Very,
unlike the
very
Westport,
famous.
yeah, the White Barn Theater, yeah, and she kind of started the idea of the theater club idea with subscriptions in America. She took it from what I guess had been a thing in England. And so people had subscriptions for the summer, and the Westport Playhouse, which was right across town, did summer stock. So that's where you go to see, Juliet Mills in whatever play, a lot of movie stars and stuff touring in whatever play they tour in for the summer stock circuit. At the White Barn, though, had like Lanford Wilson's new plays trying out. And it was very informal, and they'd come up for the weekend with all kinds of people who wanted to try out plays or add their friends. So you'd have Jason Robards or somebody else like that just hanging out. And Lucille would treat it all as a big dinner party. So she had been a friend of my father's, particularly going way back. And so when my sister and I were about 15 or so, we could ride our bikes there from the house. And my mom called Lucille up and said, Lucille, take these girls and get this theater bug out of them, and make them sweep the stage or something, get it over it. And so you saw how successful that was. But we did had a enormously fun and super educational, like I was Estelle Parsons' dresser when I was a teenager.
Oh, wow.
Dresser, it means nothing. I was a kid apprenticing at this theater where there were sort of bats and mice and stuff like that backstage, and Estelle Parsons, who was extremely nice to me as a kid, needed somebody to help her put change costumes or whatever. So therefore I was her dresser. So as an adult, I'd say, Estelle, I was your dresser when I was a teenager. And
did she remember you?
No, she did not remember me. However, she was very nice, and I got to know her as an adult, and she's always treated me very well.
So was this your training, or did you go to school to get formally trained in the theater?
I would say that that's probably the best training anybody could have for that sort of thing. I always knew I wanted to be a writer. I always knew I wanted to be a playwright. I was that kid in the neighborhood where, in those kind of rural suburban places, especially, I guess, pre-video games, you used to hack around with the kids in the neighborhood and ride your bikes and stuff. And I was that kid that said, hey, let's put on a show. Hey, let's do this. And so I was always, I remember I was in really young, and maybe like 8. And the movie Oliver used to show at Christmas, and I remember recreating the entire movie from memory, writing it in a notebook so that I could do it with my class at school, never occurring to me that these things were licensed, and that they actually had scripts and whatever. But I thought, no, somehow I could do this. And then I was that, hey, kids, let's put on a show kid.
So what was it about musicals in particular that drew you in, as opposed to, say, being involved in symphony music or being involved in rock and roll or that kind of thing? What was it about musical theater that drew you in?
Well, it's the theater. It's the theater of it.
That's for sure.
And the music, of course. And I loved old movies. I loved old, MGM musicals, and, That's Entertainment, which would come on TV. I'd just watch it whenever it was on, and that I have conversations with peers about this. I mean, That's Entertainment, when, viewing that for the first time, whenever they showed it, that was like life-changing. It's like, wow, there's all this stuff. And again, that style of music, I have to say that I was listening to Ella Fitzgerald in high school. All my friends were going to, rock concerts. And of course, I listened to whatever the then called top 40 of the day was, and all that. But what I was really into was Ella and Peggy Lee and Nat Cole and stuff like that.
And this was unusual, yes?
That
was from a different era. Today,
it was a totally different era.
If you said to a kid in high school today, hey, what are you listening to? And they said, oh, I'm listening to Sinatra. You'd think that's probably pretty strange for a kid in high school.
It would be strange. Yeah. Unless you went to some kind of performing arts high school, and unless you, so, a couple of things. I mean, I think a lot of people in our business were like that, because when I went to college, I went to Swarthmore College, which is a small liberal arts college outside Philadelphia.
Right.
And there were a lot of smart people there, and a lot of people whose parents also liked old movies. So you had a higher chance of like people who had some sort of interesting background, that had been exposed to a lot of this stuff, it was not that unusual. Like in my high school, it was not that unusual. And I'm remembering a funny subway ride I had with my dear sister friend, Rebecca Luker, the wonderful Broadway soprano who
Yes.
tragically left us 2 years ago this month. And so Rebecca, who's married to Danny Burstein, the actor, and my dear friend Karen Ziemba, and her husband Bill Tatum, who's also an actor. And so it was a bunch of us theater people. Basically, we would gone to some show and we were all riding uptown together. And Rebecca, who's from Alabama, Danny's from New York City and he went to Performing Arts High School. Karen was doing ballet in Michigan, before, since she could walk and, all this kind of stuff. But Becca was a real Southern, big high school. She was on the drill team and all this kind of stuff. She said, hey, you guys, remember when like we were teenagers and like you'd sneak off and go to a rock concert with your friends? And Danny and I and my sister and were like, no, we were going to like old movie houses, revival houses then. And she was like, you didn't do that. It was like, no. So, it's sometimes you grow up in an environment that really encourages you and sort of makes this different things available to you at an early age. And so I was always an old movie nut. And I would go in those days, they had revival houses where you can go and watch the Thin Man series or something like that.
Well,
on
sure.
A big screen, it was fun.
This was, I assume, prior to cable, or was it
was
cable
well,
there
it was
now?
cable was there, but it was
But there were less channels and less available.
Yeah, absolutely.
Old movies available at that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And by the way, Karen Ziemba, I've had the great fortune of interviewing her on this show as well.
Oh, lovely. Yeah.
So yeah, she's fantastic.
She's fantastic. She's the greatest person you'd ever want to watch on a stage or know personally.
I will agree with you wholeheartedly. So I'm wondering, at what point did you start to write? You say you've always been interested in writing, but were you writing as a kid?
Yeah, I was writing as a kid. It's really kind of scary.
Do you think of yourself primarily as a writer or something else?
I'm primarily a writer. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When you read my bio description, it's always, so there are people who've known me for years. What actually do you do? Because I'm a hybrid. I'm the, hey kids, let's put on a show person. And I think I'm a writer. That is my trade. That is my profession, my trained profession. And I was always a playwright and theatrical writer, I say, because it takes different forms of, script, different kinds of script things. And I think that anybody who's a writer in this world today, and I don't know LA, I've never lived there, and I've never had the privilege of writing for television or that sort of thing particularly. But for most people who write, certainly in the theater, you write something and then you go, okay, now what are we going to do with it? And there's participation and there's involvement and vision with how that thing gets to be on the stage. Sure. And how it looks on the stage.
Sure.
And so, and it's a very fluid thing. I figured out really early on when I got out of college that I could not make money as a playwright. I was not in the whole sort of grants. I didn't go to Yale Drama and I wasn't in the sort of the grant system, but I did figure out that I could make money writing. I could make a living writing. And so I very early on, I used to contribute to the Sunday New York Times. I wrote, on music and the arts and things. And that was, periodically, not infrequently, but periodically. And I could write about what I knew and what I loved. And so I wrote 4 books. I would contribute to different magazines. I wrote for Town and Country about music and arts and stuff like that. Again, all freelance. And from there, I started building the other branch of that is that I started to get asked really early on to work on people's shows, like if they're giving a Carnegie Hall concert or a club act.
Solo shows.
Solo shows, yeah. And
that's how you wound up in cabaret, I assume.
That's how I kind of got into revues and concerts. I mean, it's not all cabaret. Again, I do people's concerts. I do a lot of galas for big, at City Center or.
So let's break that down a little bit for the listeners that don't know. What is the difference between a concert, a revue, and a cabaret evening or whatever you want to call it, a cabaret show, and doing something at Carnegie Hall? What are those differences?
Sure, Steve. A cabaret, as was explained to me a long time ago, cabaret really just refers to a venue. Cabaret is the style of venue. When people I sing cabaret music, that actually doesn't mean anything.
Is cabaret something that came out of what we used to call nightclubs?
Correct. It was nightclubs, and cabaret was really just another word for that genre, and if you were very European and kind of snooty about that, you'd say, oh yes, the cabaret scene. But yeah, somebody who was a cabaret performer, it just referred to nightclubs and places where people eat and drink at tables usually.
But you still need to have a solo show in a cabaret, or more than a solo show sometimes, but you're still similar to doing a concert.
Right. It's the length. And a good club act is a very special thing. And here's what I had the opportunity for when I was just starting out. I got to know in various different ways, some of the absolute most accomplished icons of like the cabaret world, for instance. One was Rosemary Clooney. One was Barbara Cook. I had grown up with Barbara's son, Adam. We'd been children together. And so I'd known her always, but we really got a deep friendship when I grew up. And Barbara actually wanted to talk to me. And then Julie Wilson, who was the queen of the nightclubs back in the 50s and 60s, and became the queen and patron saint of the New York cabaret scene, or American cabaret scene, when she was older. And so I got to witness up close what all those women and others like them, Barbara Carroll, the great jazz pianist, who was jazz pianist, but did cabaret shows. The format of cabaret has to do with engaging an audience on a very intimate level, because you're 3 feet away from them, and doing that in the space of approximately an hour, with variety and emotional engagement and hopefully humor. And it should feel like a complete evening. And it is really unlike any other art form in the world because of that intimacy. Where in the world can you go and see Tony Bennett and be 5 feet away from Tony Bennett and feel like he's singing just to you?
And typically there would be a very small number of musicians accompanying a cabaret artist.
Absolutely. They're typically
piano.
It's true. Piano,
bass, drums.
Sometimes, piano, definitely. Then you'd have a bass, then drums,
maybe a guitar,
maybe a guitar, or maybe a horn, like a saxophone or whatever. Now, Rosemary Clooney there was a place called Rainbow and Stars in the 90s. That was a club that was at the top of the RCA building, which is now
Rockefeller Center.
Right, it's 30 Rock, made famous by the TV show, but 30 Rockefeller Plaza. And so that was on the 65th floor. The room doesn't exist anymore, but it was there in the 90s. And so Rosemary used to go in with, piano, bass, drums, guitar, saxophone, and sometimes trumpet. And that was a pretty large outlay for that, because the performer pays for the musicians. The performer pays for everything.
Oh, well, that's interesting to know. The performer pays for everything, and then they're taking part of the gate, I assume.
Well, you would think sometimes you could have a deal where they are taking part of the gate, but really in those high-end cabarets of which the Cafe Carlyle is pretty much the only one left. I'm trying to see if I'm putting my foot in my mouth. No, the Cafe Carlyle, at least of the long-time ones. No, they would pay a weekly salary.
Weekly salary.
So they'd be negotiated, that'd be negotiated by the performers' representatives, but they would get a weekly fee.
And out of that fee, they'd have to pay off the musicians.
Everything. The musicians. In Rosemary's case, she lived in LA. She lived in Beverly Hills. So she would come to New York just for that. It used to be the month of February. And they gave it to her because she was just starting her comeback after being kind of obscure for years. And in, I guess, at the end of the 80s, I suppose it was before I knew her, they gave her what was the worst slot in the entire year. And she was like, damn it, they're giving me February because they know February doesn't do any business. And, God damn it, I'm going to do business. I'm going to show them. And what happened was she became, she had her sort of her renaissance, and she became hugely like the big celebrity entertainer of that thing. And you could not get a ticket in February.
And this was in the 90s.
Uh-huh.
So sort of concurrent with, not that they were necessarily related, but, or in a way they are related. She's the aunt of George Clooney.
She is the aunt of George Clooney. And she used to tell me, I met Rosemary, I was just starting out in 1992, and pretty much just starting out. And I remember, we knew Cousin George, and, about Cousin George, my nephew's an actor, and his dad and mom are great people. I know his dad and mom well. And then it was like, yeah, George is on this new show called ER.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what's it called? It's called ER. He plays a doctor, and so then, and she guested on that and got an Emmy nomination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she was an amazing talent. I mean,
I'm a huge talent. I mean, maybe Rosemary Clooney is arguably, Ella Fitzgerald is in a class by herself, which Rosemary, Ella was her idol when she was growing up. But you could argue that Rosemary Clooney is one of the, on half a hand, best American singers of all time.
I would agree.
She was
with
that
you.
good with lyrics and her sense of time, but her sense of lyrics, she was about telling a story. And, that's the other thing about cabaret. Harder to do in concerts, but people do it. But the thing that cabaret or nightclub, for whatever nightclubs have sort of taken on the meaning of more like disco kind of things, or dance clubs or whatever, but not like nightclubs where you have a show. The singer has a chance and an obligation to tell a story. And I said to Rosemary, Rosemary became like my second mom, and my big sister, depending on, she was my mom's, generation, depending on how bad we were being. We'd talk on the phone and gossip and stuff. But I asked her, like toward the end of her life, I said, what's your definition of great singing? Do you have a definition? And she said, sure. She said, great singing is, all it is listen, I want to tell you something. And I thought that was stunning.
Well, there are technically great singers who don't know how to convey the meaning of the lyrics.
Right.
And she's talking about she was a storyteller.
A storyteller. And that's what Barbara Cook was, that when those master classes, when she started giving those, I used to go and hang out sometimes. And that was her thing. Now she came at it she was a formal actress and a Broadway actress. For those who don't know, she was the original Marion Librarian and The Music Man, a Tony winner. And Barbara had a thing about, what are you saying? And then the singer would go, well, it's about, no, just say the words, say the lyrics, and think, what are you saying? And that's where it all starts.
And really good lyrics tell a story. There's heart and something else in there. And the really great singers take that and then plus it and make it just something that sticks right in your gut. And,
right.
And that's what it's all about. So, okay. So I need to know how you get from where you were to suddenly producing concerts and reviews. How does that happen?
Well, producing, first of all, it's a misnomer for me, because what I am is an artistic director and a creative director.
Okay, so explain what you do.
Okay, so I know you're saying, Steve, it's another way of saying, so Deb, what do you do?
You know what it is together somehow, right?
I'm a putter together. Yeah, I create.
Well, you're more than an assembler.
No, I'm not. I'm an assembler. I'm a visionary. I have vision.
Well, no,
helpful. I have what happened was that, I'd be called in to work on people's shows. I'm also somebody who's called in to go hush, hush. We have a large musical and the script is in trouble. And could you redo this and not say anything, but we'll pay you something. So I've had those jobs, which I love because I'm a librettist and I really, that's what I do. And I really enjoy, to me, it's crossword puzzles is fixing a show. It's like a crossword puzzle. It's like, why is this not working? And in the first act, if you do this, how does it affect what happens in the second act? So I'm a big structure person and I love doing that.
You
kind of
and
stuff.
me both. That's my whole thing is structure.
Yeah. Structure, and some good jokes. but what happened was this fabulous person named Kristen Lancino, who used to be with Carnegie Hall and moved to the 92nd Street Y, had revamped the 50-something-year-old fantastic series that was an American Songbook series started in the 70s called Lyrics and Lyricists. And Kristen had taken over like a year or two before and completely rescued it from it was more than circling the drain at the time. And so in her new format, where she had guest curators essentially coming in to create a show specially, and so therefore you could have all top people doing that. She invited me at the suggestion of Robert Kimball, who wrote all those great, the complete lyrics of Lorenz Hart, the complete lyrics of Cole Porter, those fantastic coffee table books. So Bob Kimball is a scholar and a musical theater expert. And so I was recommended by him, and she said, it's Dorothy Fields Centennial. Would you like to put together a show about Dorothy Fields? And I said, absolutely. And I had written a book about Dorothy Fields. And so I got together my gang. Rosemary Clooney had passed by that time, but her music director, John Otto, who was closer to my age, certainly than hers, I said, would you by any chance be interested in collaborating with me? And I was so surprised when he said, sure, because he was one of the premier arrangers in the country and just great. He would work with Tony Bennett and all this stuff. And I gathered my best friend, Karen Ziemba, and Julie Wilson as a guest, and Billy Stritch, who was a great pianist singer,
Sure.
and also a dear friend of mine. And I put together this show. And finally, basically, I had a 360-degree way of using the palette. It sort of came together that I was able to, I had a very deep knowledge of the material. I was a musical person to begin with, and I come from a family of, from musicians. And I know a lot about arrangements, and I'd hung around with the right people like Rosemary and Barbara. I knew how to put together a show. I knew how to structure it. And Lyrics and Lyrics, it had this great format of that there was a narrator and that you could tell stories in a scripted way in between this material and kind of weave a story. And so that's how I started. Then I was invited back to do another show by Kristen. And then Kristen, after that, left for larger, greener pastures. And the Y said, we like your shows so much that you've done. We'd like to offer you the artistic directorship of the whole series. Do you think you could make the whole series more like your shows? And I said, I know exactly how to do that. So they produced, and I was the artistic,
So what does that mean? Artistic director means different things under different settings.
True.
Were you then assembling the artists? Were you part of that process?
Yes. I would pick, with, of course, the approval of the Y and the collaboration of the people in the administration. I would essentially choose which guest curators to bring in. There were some wonderful people like Rob Fisher, who founded the Encore series, a great musical director, and like that, who had been there before me. And so he would rotate in on like every other year or something. But basically, yeah, I would pick out who to bring in. And I'd do one myself. My own shows continued every other year, sometimes every year. And I'd pick the subjects, or I'd suggest the subjects. I'd usually talk to the guest curators about what songwriter they'd want to cover, or what kind. We got more into thematic kind of subjects, which was fun. And then I would be creatively part of the whole. Everybody would have a director. We'd figure out who everybody wanted to work with, or if they didn't have somebody, I'd find somebody. And so basically, I would assemble all the creative teams for that and work with them on the subject matter. And then as the show was brought to life over a very intense rehearsal period.
Let's talk about production in a moment, but I still want to go to the assembly of the show. How do you get to and I know you're not an assembler, we've already said that, but
yeah.
But you're bringing it together.
So let's take for an example what I'm doing now. So I have this new series at Jazz at Lincoln Center.
Mm-hmm.
And so during the pandemic, I had done some special projects for them. I left the Y 5-6 years ago So, and I went on to work with other institutions. But Jazz at Lincoln Center and I just came up with this, bringing the American Songbook back to Jazz at Lincoln Center, and coming up with this really fun series called Songbook Sundays, which is at Dizzy's every other month. Yeah, but we're doing a Rodgers and Hart show on February 5th with Emily Skinner and Kenita Miller, who was just nominated for a Tony. And so what's fun is I work with the programming, the head of programming at Jazz at Lincoln Center, and I've been given pretty much carte blanche to pick subjects. I'm going straight songwriters. So we started this series last May with a Gershwin show. Then we did a Cole Porter show, and then Duke Ellington, and then Irving Berlin. And because I decided it would be really fun to just do like straight songwriter things. So I work with them, and they collect from their starry family of jazz musicians that are either playing with Wynton Marsalis or, doing one of their many, many projects. So they identify these great star jazz players. I bring in my own musical director of my choice, and I work with different people, and then I choose singers that I think would be good for that.
Okay, so let's back up half a step. You have chosen a theme or an artist
Right.
that you're going to focus on,
Right?
and I assume you then program which songs you're going to do that evening.
Yeah, yep.
You pick the songs, you
right.
program it as to which order the songs are in. Correct. And that's important,
and
because that tells a story too, doesn't it? How you arrange the songs.
Well, you're a writer, and so you know that it's all about everything is all about storytelling, really, in our business. So how you arc the show is as important in how you're putting across the story, even if the story is quote unquote the emotional ride that you want to take the audience on.
It has to be an emotional ride, or nobody will remember it.
Exactly. And when I say I pick the songs, of course I, my first show was Gershwin show. The very first thing I did was call my bestie, Karen Ziamba, and say, I want you to be the first person to sing this new series. Gershwin, gee, you think you can manage that? Of course, Karen being a Gershwin specialist. And so I will talk together with the artists and say, listen, I would love, any of these songs appeal to you. I sort of know what songs I want in the show. I will not shove it down their throats, but I'll say, hey, how do you feel about this song or this song? And very often they'll say, I really love that song. And in fact, I do that song on concert evenings. And so we sort of work both ends toward the middle on that. So
do you then write the interstitial material as well?
Yeah. And I host it.
And you host it. Okay, good.
Yeah. So yeah, it's my party, and I cry if I want to every time. No, it's the part of the fun of doing this. And after I left the Y, I sort of evolved a format. And I mentioned the wonderful director collaborator that I work with very often, Mark Waldrop, who is the king director of revues. Mark wrote and directed the wonderful review that was a cult hit in the 90s called When Pigs Fly.
Sure.
And that was Mark's baby. And he's an award when he works on the Radio City Christmas show. He is the go-to guy for, and Mark and I have done gazillions of these kinds of shows together. And he has taught me so much, because he's just the consummate eye in terms of how to do something that really works and is classy and inventive. So I always have to credit Mark when I talk about evolving anything, and we evolved some of this together. But it's a kind of a hybrid form. It's fun. And what it is at Jazz at Lincoln Center is basically an hour or an hour and 5 minutes and Dizzy's Club is gorgeous. It's got floor to ceiling windows that overlook the park in Central Park South. And you just have these fantastic starry jazz musicians who just think it's fun to come in on a Sunday and do back-to-back shows, like that wonderful bass player India Owens, who's the gal who's on Stephen Colbert's show every night. And when they suggested her, I was like, wait, you think she'd come and do our Gershwin? And they're like, oh yeah, she's part of the family. So you have people like that. And then we always include a young artist who's like an emerging instrumentalist and an emerging singer. And it's very diverse. And so basically it's like a jam party. And I get up there and I'm sort of the
host.
The host, but I always call it, the spirit guide for the night, or the rabble rouser for the night, or whatever it is.
Do you write your material so that you're actually doing what you've written,
You
or
bet.
you're not winging it?
No, I write it and then I pretend I'm winging it. So
do you memorize it?
I do.
So you
I
go
do,
up and
for the most part.
like you're acting like you're just passing it off.
Right. Because we're show people, and that's what we do. No, but the truth of the matter is, Steve, of course I wing some of it, or, sometimes, but I do write it, because being a writer and a control freak, it's really nice that there are sometimes great ways to express things. And as a writer, I always think of what the best way is to express something.
Well, to me, that is the professional way to do a show like what you're talking about. If it was just a bunch of people that got together and said, hey, we're going to perform these 12 songs and we're just going to wing it, that tends to be a little sloppy on stage, I think.
It is. And jazz, the jazz world is something very different. You get people who just go, they just do it. Maybe they talk, maybe they don't.
No, wait a minute. What you're talking about there is someone that is performing night after night after night, and they're just doing their thing.
Well, yeah, the jazz world is different from, say, the cabaret. Some people say, what's the difference between going to a jazz club and going to a cabaret show? The difference is that a cabaret show is a thought out, structured set show. Even if the performer is, kind of, riffing and, talking, riffing, and just kind of goofing with the audience, whatever it is, it's pretty much a structured show. It's got the same set of songs almost always.
Do you interact with the performers as well? Is there some banter that goes on?
Occasionally. No, I get to speak. It's my show. No, I'm being funny. It's cleaner. It's much cleaner if everybody sort of has what they're there for.
And how much rehearsal does this take to get to where you think that we're good to go? Is it hours? Is it days? Is it weeks?
We don't have the luxury in these kinds of things. Let me put it this way. When I was doing the big review shows at the Y, rehearsals were, like an entire week. And that was putting a lot into it, but there was choreography and all of that stuff. For a show like this, whether it's jazz at Lincoln Center or a place like 54 Below, you chop it up, you rehearse, you do musical rehearsals with each individual singer and the pianist. They meet. And then that's just to get the songs where they should be, and in the right keys and with the right arrangements and all of that. And then there's a band rehearsal, one band rehearsal for usually 3 hours or so.
That day?
No, usually within the week before. Again, everybody's on the fly these days, and I can't quite say post-pandemic, because it's not really, but where we are in the pandemic, or since the end times began, it's hard to
the end times.
Yeah, it's hard to. Everybody's just everything's on a shoestring. Everybody's running around. It's I think of the before times and the end times. But so that's the band rehearsal is usually within a week, and then we have a rehearsal / sound check the day of, where we just put it up, and everybody goes through their stuff. If you can do it in order, you do it in order.
And you are working with top flight professionals who can do that. It's not like they need many days of rehearsal to get it down.
No, you know what? Here's the thing, and this. I'm fortunate in having gone along in this business as long as I have, and suddenly realizing I'm one of those people who can say, I've been in this business as long as I have, when it just, an eye blink ago, I was looking at old people saying stuff like that. But the great privilege of that is the relationships that you make.
Sure.
And so I am privileged and honored to have as my best pals, as my best colleagues, as the people, we all know each other. And all of those people are the absolute best on this earth
Sure.
at this time.
And that
And
helps, doesn't it?
I'll tell you, I wouldn't work, honestly, I won't work with any, I don't mean this in a snobby way or a snippy way, because I do work with young artists too, and all of that. The young artists that come through Jazz at Lincoln Center, and, so you're dealing with people who are working professionally. But I really believe that, at least for me, I've come to a point where life is just too short not to work with people who are the absolute best
No,
people.
I hear you.
And I'm just privileged to be able to work with the best people.
All right. So you do your shows, and you've done many of these at this point. What would you say are the biggest regular challenges that you have to overcome? Is it the assembly of talent? Is it the programming of the show? Is it technical issues? There have to be challenges that are sort of, okay, I know I'm going to face this. We're going to deal with it this way. And I've gone through this before, and blah, blah, blah.
It's usually it's scheduling.
Scheduling.
I mean, yeah, scheduling. I know that's a bad answer, because
No, that's a fine answer.
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good at what I do. Okay, I've done it an awful lot, so I'm very good at what I do.
Sure.
Just like lots of other people are very good at what they do. I'm not being whatever.
But it isn't smooth sailing every single time, is it?
No, it's not at all, because here's the thing. If you have great people, it's not like a theatrical show where so many more things can go wrong. Like, does this make sense? Will they like it? Do they lose interest in the story at, a half hour into the second act, whatever? Those are real theatrical problems, and those do not have easy solutions. So those kinds of things in the overall scope of work that I'm talking that I do, those are the headache problems. Those are the things. It's like, it's not working. Why isn't it working? How do we make it work? Or how do we make people come and see it and appreciate what this is, even though we don't have $1 gazillion worth of advertising budget? Like, those are the real problems in the theater. But really, how to make it work and how to make a good show. Something like this, which is a concert, if you're going to do all Rodgers and Hart songs, and then you have an all-star jazz ensemble, and you have Ted Rosenthal as the music director, and you have Emily Skinner as, one featured singer, and Kenita Miller as the other featured singer, the sky could fall, and it's going to be great. And if I say the wrong date for something, or I say the wrong thing and I misspeak, I'll make a joke and the audience will laugh. And, and so it's bulletproof in that way. If somebody gets sick at the last minute and you go, I need a singer, and it's 5 hours before, that's where the headaches are.
Right.
Because you're making the assumption that all your ingredients are great, and it's a very forgiving kind of format. If you're working on that musical and it's hellish because it's not coming together, that's that's the worst problems you can have.
Well, sure. And this is what you're talking about with at Jazz at Lincoln Center. This is a sort of a one-off. It's each thing is a one-off. You're not running it for weeks and weeks and weeks.
No, they're 2 back-to-back shows. It's like a really fun jam party. And again, if you work with the best people and the best ingredients, all you have to do is throw them on the stage. All I have to do is go up there, say something reasonably cogent, and it all works out. And it's very forgiving.
Do you have a particular preference if you were, say, being invited to the Broadway scene of writing musicals all day long? That's what you did. Would you prefer to do that, or is this a lot of fun and you would just keep doing that anyway?
I do both. I like doing both. I'm doing both. Yeah, I'm working on a upcoming Broadway show now with producers and stuff that I can talk more about in the future, but I'm writing the book for a great project.
Oh, cool.
Called Salvatore Mundi the Musical, all about the marketing hype involved in selling the world's most expensive painting, the Leonardo that may not actually be Leonardo, but was sold nevertheless by Christie's for $450 million. So I'm the book writer for that. So
that sounds like a lot of fun.
It is. And then I'm working on my podcast, that's one of the great gifts the pandemic has given us, which I can't say a lot about, is the idea that audio drama and the ability for people to record them without budgets of $800 million is I think huge for the world of theatrical writers and playwrights, because suddenly you have control in you have a great medium that's historically a great medium, and you can tell stories. And getting your work on at the non-for-profits is very difficult anyway on a really good day, and these are not really good days. So I came up with this idea for a radio adventure series about a band of middle-aged theater women who meet in a helplessness therapy group with their aged Jewish therapist named Frida, and they are through an unfortunate accident in the Columbia University physics lab next door, are transformed into superheroes with the task of saving democracy against a super evil organization called Orwell, of which all the Trumps and the Putins or whatever, they're all pawns of Orwell, whose job it is to sow hatred, disinformation, and destroy democracy. Not that far from actual news of the world. It's a cross, but it's like as if Marvel, Rocky and Bullwinkle, Gloria Steinem, and the old Batman show had a love child. And so it is ridiculous. It's quite funny and it's ridiculous. So I wrote it. Mark Walderup's directing it, or has directed it. We've recorded our first series. And it's got all-star Broadway cast. It's got, Nancy Opel and Donna Lynn Champlin and Emily Skinner and Karen Ziemba and Keisha Lewis. And Judy Blazer plays the aged Jewish therapist who gets transformed into their 9-foot-tall oracle, but still says things like, "Darling, have a rugula." So it's great. Jason Gra is in it. Lucy Arnaz plays the guest villain.
Jason Gra has also been on this show.
Has he?
Yes,
well,
he
lucky. He's wonderful to be with at any time.
Isn't he? He's fantastic.
Yes, he's fantastic.
So is you have a release date for the podcast?
We're mixing it right now. There's a really talented composer and recording guy that is a friend and collaborator of mine named Nathan Scalzone, and he's written us a John Williams-esque theme and also an I Spy kind of theme. And so he's doing musical underscoring and mixing, and that's happening right now. But we just finished recording everybody. And
well, by the time this show releases, because I always record a little bit in advance, by the time this show releases, perhaps you'll be able to find it. Where will it be available?
It will be available on all the places you normally get your podcasts, all the major podcast apps and platforms.
Just like StoryBeat, you can find it everywhere, which is what makes it fun, because you can find it everywhere at
Isn't
any
that great?
time. It is.
But that's really so cool. I think it's really great for creatives and the arts in general, and for people getting to see and hear and learn more.
Speaking of learning, are you a research maven? Is it something that you love to do because you have to deal with all these existing people and their backgrounds?
I do my research. I love to do research. It's really fun. I usually do it historically when I'm doing some sort of a project. If I wrote a book on Dorothy Fields, I've written several other books. So to go through somebody's papers. And I wrote an article on the great songwriter Carolyn Lee, who's a lyricist who wrote a lot of really big hit like Sinatra songs with Cy Coleman. So to actually see in her handwriting the lyrics that she and Cy Coleman wrote for Little Me, and the changes that she made, and then to see which of those actually had first been written as a spec assignment to try to get the job to be the songwriters for Gypsy.
Oh, wow.
Which they did not get.
Obviously.
Spoiler alert. They didn't get that. And
yeah, really.
But to see that in the handwriting, or like I did a project, Emily Skinner and I had been working on a Mae West project, which is on hold for her. So to do all that research about Mae West and that, I mean, what could be better than that?
So I assume you must enjoy it. You say you like it. You
love it
because research is an entirely different thing than writing, though they have a connection.
Sure. And research is just so much fun though, because you can just sort of be there with your pizza or whatever. Well, certainly not in the library. They frown on that. But but to be able to to delve into other people's lives or work, or find out the history of shows. I mean, that's my thing. I love the history of anything, and learning about all of that is hugely fun. And then if you're going to write about it, the trick is to sort of almost forget everything that you've kind of eaten up and have it come out in a fresh way and not get bogged down in it. That's the tricky part.
What is it that you look for when you're thinking, I want to do a new project? I want to write a new book. I want to find a new subject. I want to do a new show. What is it that you look for? Is there some particular thing? What is the thing that stands out for you as what you must have in order to justify you, as you said, at this point in your career, for you to justify spending your time on it?
You know what? It's a really good question. I have two answers for it. One is something that sometimes you just feel in your gut when something's a great idea, something that makes that gives me joy thinking about it, because it's something that you're going to have to spend a lot of time with. So something that sparks that, where you just feel the deliciousness of it, the imagination, the joy, and also, who am I going to collaborate with? That's huge for me, because most of what I do, I have not written a book since I was very young, like a published book since I was very young. I'm not talking about, Broadway, musical theater book, librettos kind of books. That's a different kind of thing.
Well, what makes a good collaboration work, and why would you want to work with someone on a specific subject? It's like a marriage, yes?
Yes, it is. And it's got its tricky things to it. We could, I'm sure, all have a 6-hour session about that.
No question.
But in my view, I don't seek people out and say, I wish I could collaborate with that person. I have this idea. I'm going to take it to them. I'm fortunately at a point where my life is filled richly with wonderfully talented people. But I think, who do I really want to spend time with? Clearly, and that person has the skills, or the yin yang thing with me to work on it with. And then, of course, there's the niceties of making your rules so nobody steps on. You don't get cranky with each other, but it really is, who do I want to do this project with? And I love who I'm working with on the Salvator Mundi project. The superheroes is the perfect example of that. I had this crazy idea, and it just struck me as hilarious, as a funny idea. And then I thought I could put my favorite people in this, and they'd all bring, and that's why it's sort of like, almost, it's my favorite thing of this type that I'm working on, because I get to just I get to spend an afternoon with Donna Lynn Champlin or Nancy Opal or any of the other people I mentioned, and say, let's do this. And these are all people that are the absolute best in the business, and the absolute and people that I love to be in a room with.
I love the notion that you say that it has to hit you in the gut, basically.
Yeah.
You have a sense of it. You have a feeling about it. So there's no doubt that is an important part of starting any new project. And I think as you get further along in a career, those things become more specific for you, rather than in the beginning, where you're open to everything in the world and you're not sure what you want to do, and you're not sure when it hits you. But as you mature into a career, suddenly you've eliminated a lot of things that you don't want to work on, and now you find things that absolutely have to hit you in the gut.
I absolutely agree. And one of the great sort of the cool things about getting further along in a career and more mature is that, and then you throw in a pandemic and a few life catastrophes to go with it.
Nothing
you just
to
go,
it.
you know what? I have such a clear notion now of what I want to spend my time on, and who I want to spend it with, and who I don't, and what I just cannot be bothered with.
Sure.
And it's a really wonderful feeling.
Well, it's clarifying.
Yeah.
You feel like, and I have the same feeling, by the way, that you've come into your own, and that your voice is there, and that you know what you want to do, and you're just moving forward on whatever that is you're doing.
Right. And that time is, I don't mean this in a morbid way, but that time is precious.
Oh, totally.
You know, it's finite and it's precious. And there's been a huge clarifying thing about this pandemic in terms of what's worth and who's worth my time and attention. And I'm not talking about being super crabby to everybody, because listen, I am blessed with more wonderful people in my life. And the people who have given me grief are not the close people in my life. It's the ancillary people that you have to,
Well, you're fortunate in life if you have one or two or three really, really good friends, and then lots of associates and acquaintances. And that's what that's what I think you're saying, that you've got great people around you.
But you're right, I do. But also, if you're fortunate to have one or two or three great friends, I am 100 times blessed.
Well, then you are blessed.
I am incredibly blessed.
I have been speaking for an hour with
just
this fantastic creative force, Deb Winer, and we're going to wind this thing down a little bit. And I'm just wondering, in all of your many experiences in this business of ours, I'm wondering if you're able to share with us a story that's either weird, quirky, strange, offbeat, or maybe just plain funny.
The weirdest things happen when you have to sort of be more on the fly. Here's one of the strangest things. Okay, so I got a call from a producer friend of mine. This was maybe like 15 years ago or even more, who was an event producer. And he said, it's Sally Rand's. I'm going to explain who Sally Rand is in a second. Yes. So it's the centennial of Sally Rand. Now, my grandparents knew who Sally Rand was. My father probably as well. Sally Rand was the other Gypsy Rose Lee. Sally Rand was a fan dancer who did and she was super, super, super famous at the time, in like the 30s and the 40s and whatever. And so she used to go around the country and tour, and she was famous for doing this elaborate fan dance with these two ostrich fans and whatever. And then she also was famous for doing, and she would strategically cover herself with the fans, but essentially, it was a exotic dance.
It was a striptease.
She was a striptease. Yeah. Striptease with fans. And the other thing she did apparently was something called the bubble dance. And she had a large floating kind of a translucent kind of silvery beach ball-y kind of thing. And she used to do this dance, very scantily clad, this dance. And again, obscure key parts of herself with that. So she was like one of the big famous people of like the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. Just started to kind of go out, but the era of Gypsy Rose Lee, maybe the 20s. So this guy says, I dare you to make a show celebrating Sally Rand's centennial of her birth. Okay. He said, I will produce it, and we will do it for the benefit of Animal Haven, a wonderful, pet adoption, animal rescue service. And if you can put on a show about Sally Rand. And I said, I take you up on that bet. And so I went and I learned everything, about Sally Rand. Great. I signed up for it. He got town hall. We invited, lots of Broadway performers. We had like great performers. We had like, BB Newirth was going to be like the narrator and all this kind of stuff. And Katie Huffman. And it was just like lines and lines of people. And we went to our first production meeting, and we found out that Sally Rand did nothing else in her life than the fan dance and the bubble dance. That's all she had. And we needed to fill 90 minutes of a show with there was literally nothing. And we started making up. The wonderful director choreographer, Tony Stevens, was the director. And we literally started just making crap up to fill 90 minutes of like making the story. It was just all this bullshit that we made up. And you know what? It came out to be a hugely entertaining show, but we was like, puppets, let's get puppets. And we got like giant puppets with a thing. And we're like, how do we tie this to her growing up in a farmyard? And then we said, let's have one of the puppets eat out of BB Newirth's hand. And then Tony Stevens, the director, said, I used to do the State Farm industrial show, and we have chicken costumes with heads and feathery things. Let's get a bunch of showgirls and put them in chicken costumes with a head, and I'll do a striptease out of the chicken costume, taking off their heads to a backbeat. It was like the most insane thing, because we needed to, because we had signed on to this thing, not knowing that she only had really 7 minutes worth of material.
And you pulled it off.
We pulled it off. It did well. And it was one of the most interesting, happy experiences of my life. It was absolutely a blast.
Do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip for those who are maybe just starting out in the business, or they're in a little bit and trying to get to the next level? Is there something that you tell folks like that?
Yeah, two things. One is evidenced by this Sally Rand made up show benefit story by the seat of our pants. And that is that you honestly is to sort of embrace the fact that you don't know what to expect. Things are very unpredictable in this business. And sometimes you think that something's going to be one kind of thing, and it turns out to be an entirely other kind of thing. And that Sally Rand thing is like a perfect example. It seemed like, okay, this straightforward, fun kind of project. I took it on a dare. I don't think there was money. I don't think I got paid for it. It was a benefit for Animal Haven. But we went on this journey that we absolutely never would have gone on had this, possible calamity not happened, in realizing that there was absolutely no material. And the other thing is, and it sort of goes with it, everything I've said, I think people should pay attention to the relationships in this business. I think that if you ask me what my favorite thing is about what I do, I would say first the people. I get to exist and collaborate and create art with people who are not only enormously talented, but people who I love like sisters and brothers and aunts and uncles. I'm really lucky to have been mentored by people like Sheldon Harnick, who is a god to everybody in the theater and musical theater. And I've learned, and some of the women I mentioned before, like Barbara Cook and Rosemary, and I learned so much from them, also about how you maintain a very long career. And I think that how you treat people, dag nabbit, is going to come back and bite you if it's not nice. And it really is true that how you treat people on the way up, you're going to meet them on the way down. But it pays dividends if you need a mercenary reason for it, to just be honest with people, to not try to flim-flam them or scam them, or just be snippy at them, or talk down to them just because you happen to be in a bad mood that day. Well, save it for your loved ones or your cat.
I have been telling people and students for a very long time that you don't want to burn bridges too early in your career. That's for sure.
Yeah. And, just if you're just respectful to people. But the cool thing is that you will meet the best people you could possibly imagine. And you're going to make those friendships when you're young and sort of starting out. And then those friendships, because it really is one big traveling circus. It's not like working for a corporation. And you're going to end up working with that person again, or that person's best friend, or that person's roommate, or that person's, husband, or whatever it is. And then those bonds get very, very strong. And by the time you get to be, we're veterans, I guess, right now.
Well, it's all about multiple projects, because you're going to do multiple projects over a lifetime and a career. Not, as you say, not corporate. You're not going to be at a job at a desk for the rest of your life in show business. No, you're going to be doing multiple projects. And multiple projects at any given point in time. We're all juggling several projects at the same time. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and and having those relationships is like the best thing in the world, professionally and personally. Well, that is very sound advice. I think that all three of those, the unpredictability of the business, having great relationships, and treating people well. I think that those are three very wise pieces of advice, and that anybody would be smart to follow those thoughts for sure. Deb Winer, this has been a fantastic hour plus on StoryBeat today, and I cannot thank you enough for spending some time with me. And sky's still the limit.
Yeah, Steve, I got to thank you for having me. I've had a wonderful time talking with you. I'm really glad I got over COVID in time to do that, because it made it totally worth it. Well, it's been great fun.
Well, I'm glad you got over COVID period, let alone to do the show. That's for sure. So thank you so much.
And thank you, Steve.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.